Let's see, who are we still missing? We're still missing Haydn. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, everybody is here now. We'll begin with just a very quick review of this week's Torah portion. It's called Beshalach, and it continues, obviously, where we left off last week with the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, leaving Egypt. And then the Torah says God decides not to send them the direct way, but have them go backwards, actually. And then finds them next to what is called in Hebrew Yam Suf. Yam Suf really means sea of reed or reeds, often translated in many works as the Red Sea, but it's not actually what his name is in Hebrew, Yam Suf, which we don't know for sure what that is. And we have Israel encamped next to the sea, the Egyptians coming after them. And we have the famous story of Israel crossing through the sea and then the Egyptians following and being drowned by the waters. And following that, we have what is called Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. All right, Israel, Moses and the children of Israel sing to the Lord, saying, that song gives the title to the Shabbat. You know, it's Parshat Beshalach, but it's called Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of the song, because we have the Shirah, the song at the sea, and in the Torah, when we have poetic renditions, there's a special way of writing them, inscribing them in the Torah rather than straight lines. It's a few words, a space, a few words, a space, and then the next line begins so that you have words under the spaces that were above. The Talmud calls them bricks. And I want to add, there's a famous midrash that says when Israel was singing, because they defeated the Egyptians and the end of the Egyptian threat, the angels in heaven wanted to sing. And according to this midrash, God tells the angels they can't sing because my children are drowning in the sea. And that's a very important idea that we express, that in the midrash, even though Egypt is being punished, they're still God's children. The Chafetz Chaim, the author of the work called the Mishnah Berurah, which we'll mention later tonight, uses that as an explanation on the holiday of Sukkot. Every day of Sukkot, we recite the entire Hallel, all the portions of the passages from the book of Psalms that Hallel consists of. On Rosh Chodesh, we do what we call Hallel B'Diluk. We omit parts. It's usually called a half Hallel, but it's really not accurate description. Hallel B'Diluk. On Passover, while we do the entire Hallel on the first 2 days of Pesach, we don't do the full Hallel on the rest of the intermediate days nor the last days of Passover. And the Chafetz Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah, explains because the last day of the holiday, which is when we read the passage of the song, because that's, at least according to the biblical chronology, that's when it takes place. we don't want to sing because the Egyptians were drowning. Even though Israel sang at that time, we lessen our joy because it's at the expense of the Egyptians. Whether or not that's the actual reason for that, there's other theories as well. But it is fascinating. The Chofetz Chaim says we don't do it on the last day. We don't do the full Hallel on the last day of Passover. So in the intermediate days, so that they shouldn't look like they're more important than the end of Passover, we don't do the full Hallel on the intermediate days of Passover either. Certainly a very sympathetic reading for that passage, understanding of it anyway. It's also called Shabbat Shirah because the rabbis chose as a parallel to read on this Shabbat the passage from the story of Devorah in the book of Shoftim. Remember, Devorah was a prophetess. She was also a shofet, a leader of Israel during the age of the judges. And after the victory over Sisera, there's the song of Devorah. And so since it's Shabbat Shirah, the song of Moses the sea, we also read the song of Devorah on this Shabbat. So that gives it the name of Shabbat Shirah. In the old days, when we used to go to synagogue and the places were full, many synagogues make it a special day to dress up services with lots of singing, extra musicality to the service. So that is this week's Torah portion. Now, I want to continue with the Hebrew. So we share the screen. Go to the Adobe. Okay. There we go. I apologize. We're a little, you may seem that it's offside. Actually, straight across. Everybody else sits at an angle. I did a bad job copying this. Okay. We are working on the bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu. This is the introduction formula for every time we recite a bracha on the performance of a mitzvah. Would that help get a little bit bigger? All right. Okay. So praise you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us through his commandments and commanded us to do whatever it is. Okay, so the next letter that we're working on is from the word Kiddushanu, sanctified us, made us holy. So that's the letter Kuf. This letter here, which really does parallel the English K. Kuf in the Greek alphabet became Kappa. It's always a K. We always pronounce it with the sound of the letter K, as in Kiddush. So I'm going to ask everybody to unmute themselves, and we will read through this, starting with line number 1. Maybe I should make that a little bit smaller. It's 100%, huh? No, that's not 48. Let's see. Can I go in the middle?
Rabbi, if you drop the drop down, see next to 100, there's a drop down arrow. No, to the other side of that. To the right side of the 100, there's a little arrow pointing down. You click on that arrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but that's
it's you can actually.
All right, fit width. All right, we'll live with this. That's what I had before. I can also highlight it and make it 90. See, I'm not completely illiterate, mostly, but not completely. Okay. So the letter Kuf, the K sound. So let's begin with line number 1. We have Ka,
Ka,
Ka, Ke, Ku. I always love this. It really sounds like we know what we're talking about here, right? Okay. Ko, Ki, Kai, Ki, and Ki. All right, perfect. Now, the one for this time of year is Kar,
Car.
which is cold. It is cold outside tonight. Kor,
Core.
kash,
Cash.
kam,
Ham.
coats,
Coats.
kuf,
Kuf.
and takain.
Taken.
Okay, line number 3. Litaken,
Letaken.
takana,
Takana.
tikun,
Tikun.
yakum,
Yakum.
yafe,
Yafe.
and koshi.
Koshi.
It's not too difficult, koshi. Koshi means difficult. Okay, kai,
Kai.
yam,
Yam.
kayam,
Kayam.
keshet,
Keshet.
boker.
Boker.
I keep hearing this Israeli sounding accent out there. Somebody's doing a real nice job, not me. Okay, and rahok.
Rachot.
Yes. Okay, line number 5. Keren.
Karen.
Now, the word Karen means horn, but it's also used for a fund. Karen Kayemet LiYisrael means the Israel National Fund. So the word Karen is used a lot. Okay, we have Machon,
Machon.
Mechonit,
Mechonit.
yeah, watch both ways when you cross the road for the Mechonit, for the car. Kayemet,
Kayamet.
Shosh,
Shosh.
Shoshana.
Shoshana.
Okay. Porates,
Porate.
Saphon,
Saffron.
Negba,
Mekba.
Negba.
Nekma.
Okay, the word
Negba.
Negba means, actually literally means to the Negev. And becomes therefore the word for south. When you travel south in Israel, you're going towards the Negev. So that's Negba. Tzalahat,
Talahat.
Lekach,
Lecha.
Kach, and Yitzchak.
Yitzchak.
When many years ago, when I spent a year in Israel studying, we had a cook in the building, and she would always call Yitzchak, Yitzchak. A nice, she was a Taiman, Yitzchak. We all, was looking for Yitzchak. Yitzchak is Isaac, right? Okay. Line 7. Likrat. Likrat. Lifrots.
Lifrots.
Konim.
Konim.
Liknot.
Liknot.
Takumi.
Takumi.
All right. And we talked about this the other day, the idea about the dot on the top from double duty. Okay. The letter Dalet. Okay, the next letter that we're looking at has a value of D, as in David, David. It happens, no one today really makes that distinction, but there is technically a difference between with and without a dot. Biblical Hebrew would have had a distinctive sound to it. Some think it was maybe like a TH almost. But today we don't make a distinction, even though grammatically you'll have dots in it sometimes. So the Dalet, and you can see just like Dalet, delta in the Greek. D is in David, David. So line number 1, we have D,
D,
D, day,
day,
D, do,
do,
da,
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 do,
do,
day,
day,
de.
de,
All right. 2, don,
dan,
dal,
dal,
lod,
lod,
desha,
deshe,
door.
door,
I want to point out, okay, these two letters are often confused with each other when you look at it real quickly. But notice the Dalet has this little bump on the end. On the right side, it has a curve there. And while the Resh, the R sound is smooth coming down. See that? So you shouldn't make that be confused with them. Okay. Okay. So we have door. Let's go to the next one. Daka
daka,
and daf.
Daf.
daf,
Line 3. Derash.
derash,
And you may kind of hear the sound. We had midrash. Midrash means to search out, to seek out meaning of something. That's what derash means. And to do it is ladrosh.
rosh,
And remember, we just were reminded, bottom of the previous page, how the dot from the shin sometimes serves for both. But here, as you see in ladrosh, they put both dots in. That's the more common modern way to put in the voweling that way. Ladrosh. Ledor,
ledor,
cheder,
cheder,
chadarim,
chadarim,
and degel.
degel,
Okay. Line 4. Tzedek,
tzedek,
tirdof,
tirdof,
tzadik,
tzadik,
tzedakah,
tzedakah,
lehatzitz,
lehatzitz,
not lecha, leha. That's the letter hey, right? There's a little gap there in the hey. And last word is asher.
asher,
Okay, line 5. Od, darshan,
darshan,
Gadol.
Gadol.
Oops, come on. Gedolim.
Gedolim.
Olim.
Dagesh.
Dagesh.
Agada.
Agada.
Agada is a story. And we've been talking about Midrash. Slide 6, first word, Midrash. Midrash.
Midrash.
Enosh.
Enosh.
Darom,
Darom.
which is another word for south. Kedem,
Edem.
Kadima.
Kadima.
Kedem means in front of you. Kadima means to go towards your front. In Israel, therefore, Kedma or Kedem is used for east. And in ancient Israel, when we look at a map today, we put the north at the top, south at the bottom, east to the right, west to the left. Biblical Hebrew in the Bible talks about facing east. You orient towards the east. So in front of you, Kedma is the east. Yamina to your right would be to the south. Smola would be to the north. Achrona behind you would then be to the west. So those are also all words used for the different directions. But it's important to, it's not a major thing for you to remember, but it's nice to remember that the map orientation in ancient Israel was towards the east and not towards the north like we commonly do today. Okay, line 7. Dargan,
Argan.
Gamad,
Gamad.
Begadim,
Begadim.
Kedusha,
Edusha.
Mikdash. Mikdash.
Dash.
And the word
Mikdash.
Kidshanu
Idshanu.
makes us holy. Now the word, the Kuf Dalet Shin, all of that has the letter Kuf with the letter Daled, and then with the letter Shin has the meaning to be distinct, separate, and hence holy, because that which is holy completely other. That which is other, separate and distinct. So Kuf Dalet Shin is the root for Kiddush, to make the Kiddush over the wine, to say the Kaddish, Kiddushanu made us holy, made us, sanctified us. Okay, the last one we're going to learn tonight is the letter Vav. Originally, it was only a consonantal letter. Vav is, today we pronounce it as a V sound. However, in ancient Hebrew, it may have been a W sound. Hence, in Arabic, it's Dawid, not David, which retains a W sound for it. But when it doesn't have a dot on top, it's very easy to recognize that it is to be pronounced as a consonant. We get into trouble when we have a dot on top. You have to know whether it's meant to be a consonant or the vowel sound of O. By itself, standing as we see in the first line, you wouldn't know, but we're going to treat it like a consonant unless it's very clear that it's not, okay? Made myself as clear as mud there, I'm sure.
Rabbi,
Yes,
sorry for interrupting. So Vav is the same shape as Holam. the letter. No.
Okay.
And
All right, now remember, right, look. Okay,
yeah.
remember, I talked about the fact that certain letters later in the development of Hebrew became vowel indicators before the vowel system that we have. So originally, the letter Vav, this letter that we're working on, the Vav here, was purely a consonant. At some stage in history, by the time of the Masoretes in Tzfat in the 9th century, worked out our vowel system that we use today, the Nikud, they used this to indicate O.
I see.
All right. And we will see it as we go along in the course of this page. And there's a couple of places where you're going to have to learn that where the Vav is being pronounced as a V versus an O, or even Vo. All right, so we'll just have to see that when we get to it, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for the question there. Okay, line number 1, we have Va,
Va.
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 Va,
Va.
Ve,
Ve.
Ve,
Ve.
V,
Vi.
V,
Va.
and we're treating it as a consonant, so it is Vo. Not O, but Vo, because we're treating right now as a consonant, okay? And Ve.
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 You may have heard the expression oy vey. It's really common, really used in Yiddish as woe is me. Vey is mir. Me is vey. In Yiddish, I'm not sure what the German exactly is, probably the same thing. Okay. So line number 2, we have Vav,
Va.
Va.
Vu,
Vu.
Vu.
Vo,
Vo.
Zav,
Sav.
Tziva.
Siva.
Okay, this is a little tricky here. This is actually Ho Ve.
Ove.
Right, now how would you figure that out is, well, I know it, so it's not a problem for me, but let's look at it to try and figure it out. There's the letter Hey. What vowel is associated with it?
O.
Oh, that's the only possible vowel sound to go with it. So that has to be Ho Ve. Remember, the consonant always has to have a vowel. So that's the giveaway that this is Ho Ve. Follow me?
Over.
Okay, anybody not understand that?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I know there's like a something different rule with Yud and Vav, like in the word Achshav.
Yeah.
It's silent.
Yeah, it kind
Or
of
how
gets
does it work
absorbed
out?
into the vowel that comes with it. Well, we haven't got to it, but yet in a minute, we'll get to the word here.
Okay.
Vilon. All right, it's just the associated with the vowel sound here, vilon. Achshav, I suppose it really should be achshav, but you don't hear the Y sound at all.
Yes.
Okay. Everything's got its own little idiosyncrasies. There may be something more to it that I'm unaware of. Okay. Okay, let's go down now to line 3. Vikam.
Vikam.
Vaten.
Vaten.
Vihadag.
Vihadag.
Why you'd want to say and the fish anyway. Vihatur.
V'atzur.
Va'ad.
Va'ad.
Va'ad. Line 4. Rava.
Rava.
Revach.
Revach.
Roveach.
Roveach.
I remember because the chet's on the end there with the patach under it,
Roveach.
the vowel sound comes first. Roveach.
Roveach.
Because it was kind of difficult to say roveach. It is hard to sound. And so Hebrew adds an extra sound there, roveach, to tell you there's a het on the end. And then ve'ilu.
Ve'ilu.
5. Vilahat.
Velachat.
Vatiten.
Vatiten.
Vihotzi.
Vehotzi.
Vilon.
Vilod. Vilod. Lon.
Vilon. The accent's on the last syllable.
Vilon.
Viter. Vichule.
Vehule.
Vatrani.
Atrani.
Vatrani.
Vatrani.
All right, here's another tough one. Ve ha ho ve. Yeah, that's a little tough. All right, so we've got. Whoops. We have Viha, Ho, Ve. Ha, Ho, Ve. That's a toughie. Tongue twister there. But you surely can do it. 7. Vadaut.
Vadaut.
Vador.
Vador.
Ufrots. Okay. You should know a lot of these are words that we find in the prayers. Dor vador, T10, Vahotzi, all of these are words that will come up in our prayers. Okay. We're going back now to our studies about the oral Torah and the written Torah. We've been talking about Midrash. Just to review for you, I didn't put up that page, but let me find it. Just a second, ladies and gentlemen. JB. What is this? Introduction to Judaism. Oh yeah, here it is. Another chart. Okay. All right, so remember we had this. Everybody see the chart here, the Torah, oral law, written law that's showing? Okay. So we've been talking about Midrash, and so far we mostly talked about what we call Midrash Agadah. Remember we had crossed the word Agadah earlier. Okay, so we're finishing up the Midrash portion, and we're going to we're in the portion now, which is Midrash Halacha, the legal. And I chose, as you'll see as we go along, passages that talk about the Shema. the recitation of the Shema to illustrate the various forms of rabbinic literature to help you understand it. Okay, so in the Sifrei, which is a rabbinic midrashic commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, is mostly a legal midrash halacha. We talked about this one. You shall love Lord your God to serve out of love, right? And it's really not so legal in sounding, because it's talking about serving God from love, which is more of a homiletical idea. But in that same book, a little bit later, we have the following. Another variantly is how they translate, another explanation. You shall teach, it literally means to repeat them to your sons, okay, or to your children. These sections, that's what the Shema, the Hayam Shemo, and Vayomer, and the section of Tzitzit, okay, must be repeated morning and evening. And Kadesh Li and all this need not be repeated. So it makes a statement that certain passages should be repeated and others you don't need to repeat. For it would follow a fortiori, kal v'chomer, major to minor, that they should repeat. You might have thought they should be repeated, okay? That is the section Vayomer, which is not included in binding. I know it's hard to understand this, but it is included in the mitzvah of repetition. So he's saying, look, we have a word. Word is repeated in the different ones. You might have thought that means we have to repeat all of these passages. Okay? And just you don't need to remember this. I'm just trying to get you to have a feel for it. So you might have thought you have to repeat them. Therefore, it is written, and you shall repeat them. That is, these words are just mentioned to your sons and not the others. Okay, so it's trying to see in the words, when you repeat them to your children, you'll speak to them, you lie at home, etc., in your home, etc. It's saying this refers exclusively to the words that just preceded it, the passages of the Shema. Okay, so you see, it's narrowing down, trying to give us the idea of what is required about reciting the Shema. And the next paragraph, because it says in the Shema, you should not, I can say it in Hebrew, but when I start putting it out in English, it starts to throw me off. Let me grab a Siddur. Okay. I can rattle it off in Hebrew, but to try and rattle it off in English is not going to work as well. Okay. You love Lord your God with your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. Let these matters that command you today be upon your heart. Teach them thoroughly to your children. Vishinantam levanecha. They say repeat them, teach them to your children, and speak of them when you sit at home and when you walk on the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Okay. So the translations always vary a little bit. So in your lying down, when you lie down, okay. So it says in the Shema when you lie down. I might think, even if he retired in the middle of the day, you might think you have to say the Shema whenever you take a nap. And in your rising, you might think even if he rose in the day. So I say I took a nap as I did this afternoon. Okay. Do I need to say the Shema when I went to lie down and when I got up? You might have thought that. So therefore, it is written in your sitting in your house and in your walking on the way. So the explanation of this is that the Torah is speaking the normal instance, common, when people normally retire and get up, rise. Now, it's not whenever you take a nap, but whenever people normally go to bed at night, and normally when people get up in the morning. So now this includes the following statement. Another explanation, variantly, this is the dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai say in the evening, all men recline and recite the Shema, when you lie down. So Beit Shammai, one of the early rabbinic schools, says that's telling us how we are to position ourselves when we say the Shema at night. Mishinantam levanecha. When you lie down and recite Shema, and in the morning they stand it being written, and when you lie down and when you stand, you lie down when you rise up. So Beit Shammai wants to say in the Sifrei that the way you say the Shema at night when you lie down, in the morning when you get up. Beit Hillel, on the other hand, the other school says everyone recites it in their own way, or how they are at the time, it being written when you walk on the way. If so, what is the meaning, the intent of when you lie down, when you rise up, the time when people normally retire, and the time when they normally rise? So this, if I were studying the Torah using the Midrash of Sifrei Devarim, when I get to the book of Deuteronomy, I would come to this passage and I would see in the book of Deuteronomy the explanation of when we say the Shema, how we say the Shema, the difference of opinion of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in the saying the Shema, and what time it's supposed to be said. Right? But that's done by having it as a commentary and explanation of the Torah passage. That's not the best way necessarily of remembering all of these laws. So now, the Midrash is, as I said, is following the text of the Torah, comments directly with it. We're now going to look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not in accordance with the text of the Torah. The Mishnah is a separate work. It stands alone, even though it's based on the Torah, and it is organized. The Mishnah is compiled around the year 200 of the Common Era by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, the head of the Jewish community. He's given credit for editing the Mishnah. And so that is the oral law as it was codified. We don't know when it was first really written. It may have been oral for many generations, but today, of course, we find it in written texts. So the very first Mishnah, the very first paragraph, Mishnah Brachot, the first section of the Mishnah is called Brachot, blessings. In Hebrew, Meimatan Karishim Abarvi, Mishash Konim Nechasim Lecho, Betrumatan, and Sofa Mishmara Rishana, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim Omrim Ad Chatzot, Rabbi Gamliel Omer Ad Lo Tashachar. So without the extra commentary, the heavy lines are the actual words. The smaller English is the addition that was added in this to help you understand it. From when does one recite Shema in the evening? From the time when the priests enter to partake of their truma until the end of the first watch. That is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbis say until midnight. Rabbi Gamliel says until the break of dawn. Now, it's not a law code. And if you looked at this and had no understanding of the traditions about recitation of the Shema, I don't know how you would understand it from this. You have to understand the Shema. First of all, what is the Shema? The assumption is that people hearing this know what Shema is. Second assumption, they know what is meant by the time when priests enter, they eat their truma. Of course, they know what truma is. All right, and then they know what the first watch is. And then they're given an argument between Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbis, and Rabban Gamliel. Rabbi Eliezer says you can say it only to the end of the first watch. The rabbis say until midnight. And Rabban Gamliel says till before dawn. So when do you say the Shema at night? How long can you say it? When do you start? It's not so easy to understand. To cut to the chase, we understand this means from the time the priest entered the truma, which is basically the priest who has become ritually impure has to wait until the stars come out at night after he's gone to the mikveh before he can eat his truma. So the ideal time to start saying the Shema at nighttime is when the stars come out at night, generally accepted today by most authorities as 42 minutes after sunset, until the end of the first watch. According to most commentaries, that means a third of the night, from sunset to sunrise. Midnight is midnight, celestial midnight. And dawn is when dawn comes. Okay. So then this Mishnah goes on. It tells a story now. It once happened that his son, Rabbi Gamaliel's sons, returned late from the wedding hall, and they said to him, "We did not recite the Shema." He said to them, "If dawn has not yet arrived, you are obligated to recite." I don't know why this comment is here. I did it playing with it and forgot to erase it. Okay. So this is unusual. We don't usually have too many stories in the Mishnah, but we're given a story here at the very beginning of the Mishnah, which is the very first passage of the oral laws we find recorded. A story. And the story explains to us what's going on. Rabbi Gamaliel's sons come back late. They haven't said the Shema. I don't know why they didn't say the Shema. They should have stopped for a minute to daven Mariv. But Rabbi Gamaliel says you got to say it all night long. And not only that, but whenever the rabbi said in any place in the Mishnah that the mitzvah is performed only until midnight, it can actually be performed till dawn. And he gives some examples, which we'll skip. And we go down to the last few lines. If so, why did the sages say that until midnight? In order to distance a person from transgression. So this opening Mishnah says a story, and that story tells us that Rabbi Gamaliel's sons didn't say the Shema. Rabbi Gamaliel says, as long as it's not yet daybreak, you are obligated to say the Shema. And when the rabbi said, the unnamed rabbis, you have until midnight, that's because they know that people make mistakes and people don't always do what they're supposed to do. So if you waited until the break of dawn, you might miss that time also. So they made an earlier finish time. Right? This is very clearly a legal discussion of recitation of the Shema, not necessarily the easiest to understand. And we'll see why that's why the Talmud came into being. But presumably most of the people, or at least the scholars who were around at the time of the composition of the Mishnah, understood it. Now here's another example of a Mishnah that's very different in its nature. And this is from Pirkei Avot, very popular section of the Mishnah. It's really more of a ethical treatise, sometimes called Ethics of the Fathers. It begins by telling us about the transmission of the law. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua, the elders to the prophets, and prophets to the men of the great assembly. So briefly, it gives us a history of the Torah. Is an argument, are we talking about the Torah, the written Torah, or the oral Torah, or both? And in the Hebrew word used here is masar. Moshe kibel Torah misinai masarua, and the word masar, transmitted, handed over, is the word masorah, which means tradition. So it gives us a brief history, as the rabbis understood it, of the transmission of Jewish law, ending with the men of the Great Assembly, somewhere around the second century before the Common Era, around the time of the Maccabees. They said three things. Frequently in the Mishnah, the number 3 is an organizational pattern. So it says they said three things. Just a second. All right. They said three things: be patient in administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. So they gave advice to the judges of the future, to everyone. When you're making a judgment, when you're looking at something, be patient. Don't be quick to judge something. You might miss something. Every case might be different. Even if everything seems to be the same, it might not be. That's one of the principles of Jewish law, is that the rabbi is supposed, if he's asked a question about Jewish law, he's supposed to make sure what the circumstances of the questions are and whether or not that makes a difference. For example, I may have mentioned it before, there's a story that two women go to see a rabbi. His wife is sitting by there, and the first woman comes in and she shows him a chicken. And it's Friday afternoons, close to Shabbos. So the first lady shows the rabbi the chicken. The rabbi looks at it and he says it's treif, it's not kosher. She leaves. The next woman walks in. She shows the rabbi another chicken. And the chicken's got the same issue, the same problem that the first chicken had. The rabbi looks at it and he says it's kosher. She walks out. So the rabbi's wife says, I don't understand. The chickens were almost identical. Why in the first case was it treif, not kosher? And in the second case, it was kosher. So the rabbi says, look, it was a case of doubt. It might be kosher, might not be kosher. It could go either way. Since the first woman came to see me was a wealthy woman and wouldn't hurt her if she had to buy another chicken, so she would go out and buy another chicken for Shabbos. The second woman, I couldn't tell her it was kosher if it's not, but there was a doubt there. But I looked at it and she's a poor woman. If I told her the chicken was treif, not kosher, she wouldn't have any chicken for Shabbos. So the has to be careful about making the decision. If the cases are absolutely identical and it's treif, then it would be treif. If it was kosher, it would be kosher. But if there's some room for going one way or the other, it might depend upon the person who's asking the question, what their needs are. Okay. All right. Then the second one, they said, raise many disciples. Have lots of students. After all, how can you maintain Torah? How can you maintain Judaism without disciples, without people who learn and study what the Torah is all about? And finally, make a fence around the Torah. That's what we were talking about, the very first mission of the Shema. Much of the rabbinic tradition are really fences around the Torah. For example, the laws of Shabbat. Many of the laws of Shabbat are meant to protect us from violating the Sabbath. They themselves are not really forbidden from the Torah, but the rabbis forbade them in order to make a fence. For example, you theoretically can light Shabbos candles 1 minute, 1 second before Shabbos begins. So why do we insist upon doing it 18 minutes earlier? So you won't wait. So you won't rush at the last minute and maybe make a mistake. So Pirkei Avot goes on, and then it says, Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, is one of the last men in the Great Assembly. So he serves as a bridge from one part of rabbinic history to the next. He used to say, notice now it's going to be 3 things. The world stands upon 3 things: the Torah, the temple service, and practices of acts of piety. The world rests upon Torah, knowledge, learning, avodah, which originally meant the service in the temple, the sacrificial service. Today we say it refers to prayer. And then acts of piety. I don't like piety. Gemilut Chasidim means, usually we translate it as acts of loving kindness, of chesed, of being kind, of being kind to people. If you want to establish the world, you have to have these things as part and parcel of that establishment. The next Mishnah tells us about Antigonus, a man of Socho, received the tradition from Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous. He used to say, do not be like servants who serve the master in expectation of receiving a reward, but be like servants who serve the master without expectation of receiving a reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. In brief, we should serve God because it's the right thing to do, not because we want to be rewarded. So you see, these are not really questions of ritual, but this part of Pirkei of the Mishnah talks about proper behavior, especially towards the rabbis. Okay, now, so around the year 200, give or take, the Mishnah was codified by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Jude the Prince. And we also saw, when we looked at that first Mishnah of Masechet Brachot, it's not easy necessarily to understand. And a lot of things are left out by the assumption, or with the assumption that the people studying it would know these basic ideas. And then they could understand what the law should be from that basic hints that we find in the Mishnah. Now, the scholars of the next generation weren't so sure, and they began to study the Mishnah and comment on it. And there really are two redactions, two compilations of discussions surrounding the Mishnah. One was done in the land of Israel. It's called the Talmud Eretz Yisrael, the Talmud of the land of Israel. It's called, also referred to as Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud of Jerusalem, even though Jews couldn't live in Jerusalem when it was compiled. It's sometimes called the Palestinian Talmud, which has nothing to do with Yasser Arafat. But this was the Talmud compiled and composed by rabbis, for the most part, who lived in the land of Israel in the first century or 2 centuries after the Mishnah is compiled. Between the year 200 and various dates are given, 350, 400 of the Common Era.
So, Rabbi,
Yes,
the Talmud is a form of the Mishnah?
no,
Because there's also the Gemara, right?
the Talmud, or it's also called the Gemara,
Okay.
is really a commentary, elucidation, addition to the Mishnah. I'll show you a page, okay? Now, for example, let me just show you. This is what today a page of Talmud would look like. The standard Talmud. This is actually what we call Daf Yomi, today's passage to read. In the middle here is the Talmudic passage. On the right is Rashi's commentary. On the left, which is next to the binding, as it's done today, is a commentary of the Balei Tosafot. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But what it is, essentially,
We can't see anything.
you can't see anything? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was my screen, maybe.
So did
My
I.
mistake. I forgot I had to switch. Let's see. Stop share. Share screen. Okay. See it now?
Yes.
Okay. This is a standard page of the Talmud, the way it's been done for the last couple 100 years. In the middle is the Talmudic passage. On the right-hand side, or actually the side away from the binding, is Rashi's commentary, and then the side with the this side closer to the binding is the commentary of the Balei Tosafot. Like I say, we'll talk about them in a few minutes. Okay, so let's go back.
Okay, so let me just wrap my head around it one more time, if that's okay. So the Mishnah is the actual, it stands alone. It's based on the Torah, but it stands alone. It's laws that the rabbis interpreted the laws and they made into laws. And then the Talmud, it comments on it and speaks about it.
We'll look at an example. You'll see in a moment, okay?
Okay.
So, all right, everybody see this screen now? Where it says Talmud Yerushalmi? Is that clear?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
see it.
All right. Now, a few minutes ago, we read the Mishnah. The Mishnah up here said, when do we say the Shema at nighttime? From the time the priests enter to eat their truma. If I opened up for you a page of the Talmud Yerushalmi, where's my Yerushalmi? Okay. All right. This is the page of the Yerushalmi. Okay. It looks a little bit like what I showed you a minute ago, but it has its differences as well. It's written fancy, but at the top is a quotation from the Mishnah. The way it's standardly printed today, you will find the passage of the Mishnah that we're going to talk about. Okay, that's the same for both the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Talmud Bavli, what we call the Babylonian Talmud. Today they're printed on the same page. Originally they were not. Okay, so when I open the first page of the Talmud Yerushalmi, first I will have the Mishnah. The Mishnah is in Hebrew, rabbinic Hebrew. It's not quite the same as Torah Hebrew, but it is close. It's closer to the biblical Hebrew than modern English is to the English of Chaucer. I think I asked you this one time about Chaucer. People don't study Chaucer anymore. All right. I can't quote it exactly, but that's English. All right. Look up Chaucer in original English. Okay. So anyway, so the Mishnah is there. So what happens? So the Talmud is the effort by the rabbis to understand what the Mishnah is talking about, to find if there are sources in the Torah that give rise to that Mishnah, and if they are, what they are, and to explain differences of opinion that may have arisen. Because the Mishnah itself says there's a difference of opinion between Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbis, and Rabbi Gamliel. Furthermore, we saw that in the Sifrei, the Midrashic collection, they also talked about differences between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So the Talmud starts with a Mishnah passage, seeks to analyze it in many different ways. So we'll read quickly through this just to get a feel for it. We recite in our Mishnah, from the time the Kohanim entered to eat their truma, Rabbi Chia taught from the time that people usually go in to eat their bread on the eve of the Sabbath. And there is a baraita that comments on this. These opinions are close enough to be equal. So the Gemara, the Talmud there, I use the words interchangeably, Gemara and Talmud, written in Aramaic, in this case, Aramaic that was Western Aramaic, the Aramaic of the land of Israel. The rabbis talked about it and said, now, first they quote the Mishnah when they come to eat their truma. One of the rabbis said that it's really the equivalent when people go to eat their bread on Friday night, when they eat dinner on Friday night, which is still early, relatively early. And there's another rabbinic commentary that says they're basically the same thing. So they've established that when the priests enter the truma, that's the same, that's the time that we're talking about. So now the Gemara says, let us test this. Because the time the Kohanim go to eat their truma, it is still close to daytime. It is as soon as the stars come out. And the quote we have was from the time people usually go to eat their bread on the evening of Sabbath. That's an hour or two after nightfall. He says, no, this is 2 hours later. And yet you say these two opinions are close enough to be equal. So then Rabbi Yosef says the problem we resolved by claiming Tosefta refers to those small villages whose way it is to go home while it is still day to spare themselves from the animals. All I want you to feel here is that they're trying to understand what's said in the Mishnah and trying to understand other rabbinic sources that may contradict what's in the Mishnah. He goes on to say that teaches in a Braita. A Braita is not a Mishnah passage, but it's another rabbinic source. The one who recites the Shema before this has not fulfilled the obligation. It says in this Braita, if you recite the Shema before the stars come out at night, you have not fulfilled your obligation, say the Shema at nighttime. If so, why do we recite it before nightfall in the synagogue? This is going to come up a number of times later on this evening. We see that there is a principle, you're supposed to say the Shema when the stars come out at night. We see that there's a very common practice that people said the Shema in the synagogue earlier than that time. So Rabbi Yossi said, we did not recite in the synagogue to fill its obligation, rather recite it so that we may stand in prayer after a word of Torah. He says, no, we're not, when we say the Shema in the synagogue close to sunset, which is a common practice actually in today's world in most synagogues, really we're not fulfilling the mitzvah of saying the Shema at nighttime. But what we are doing is before we stand up to say the Amidah, the silent prayer, the rabbinic prayer, we should have words of Torah. And so the Shema there is just words of Torah. If you want, I'm not going to go through it now because we'll never get to finish tonight. You'll see there's a whole, I put here a whole lot of stuff from the introduction passage there from the Talmud Yerushalmi. And I think with the English additions in the square brackets, that will help you understand if you want to get a feel for it. If not, be my guest, ignore it. All right. Now, I want to just give you a different passage for a moment, and then we'll come back. The Talmud Bavli, right? It's called the Talmud Bavli, or the Talmud of the land of the Babylonian Talmud, because it was compiled in Mesopotamia, which biblically was the place where Babylonia was, Assyria was. Later on, it becomes modern day Iraq. So it's referred to as the Babylonian Talmud. It's not edited until much later than the Talmud of the land of Israel. We don't know for sure exactly when. And there's big scholarly debate on it, 450, 550, maybe even later than that. But in any case, it's written in Aramaic, which is Eastern Aramaic. It's not quite the same as the Aramaic of the Talmud from the land of Israel. It has a number of differences in form. The rabbis of the two Talmuds were familiar with each other. They mentioned each other. The rabbis went back and forth from Israel to Babylonia and from Babylonia to Israel. But nonetheless, we see that what we call the Talmud from the land from Babylonia becomes the basic Talmudic text. The most important Talmudic text is the one from Bavel, Talmud Bavli. When you hear people say they're studying Talmud, usually they're studying the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, all right. So this is a different passage, but just to show you, there's a Mishnah that says if two people find a talis, a cloak. This one says, I found it, and this one says, I found it. This one says, all of it is mine, and the other one says, all of it is mine. They go to court, and the judges say, there are no witnesses, we don't know what happened. So you divide it evenly. You divide it in half. Okay. So in the Babylonian Talmud, we have, in talking about this Mishnah passage, we have the following. Rav Papa said, and some say it was said by Rav Shimi bar Ashi. No, maybe Rav Papa didn't say it. Maybe this other rabbi said it. And some say it was unattributed. Nobody knows who said it. The first clause where each party says, I found it, is referring to a case of a found item, where two people found one item. And in the latter clause where each party says, all of it is mine, is referring to a case of buying and selling, where each party claims he is the one who bought the item from the seller. And it is necessary for the Mishnah to teach both in regard to found item and regard to purchase. The rabbis are being very, the Hebrew word is medakdek. It says in the Mishnah, two people finding the talis. Okay, go to court and decide. Why do you have to have one claim, I found it, and the other one says, I found it? One claims it all belongs to me, the other says it all belongs to me. You don't, why do you need two claims like that? The Mishnah was memorized. Mishnah is supposed to be as succinct as possible. If you have anything beyond the basics, it's got to be something teaching you more. And so they want to say there are two different cases. One is a case in which two people arguing about a found garment. They both found the cloak. The other is they went to the store and there was a bargain basement sale and they wanted to buy it at a cheap price. And they're fighting over it. And they said, I gave the merchant the money for it. And the other guy says, no, I gave the merchant the money for it. So it belongs to me, it belongs to me. So that's their attempt to explain what goes on. Now, according to the Mishnah, the two people go before the judges. A says it belongs to me. B says it belongs to me. A says, I found it. B says, I found it. So the Mishnah says you divide it in half, but each has to swear that they found it. All right. So it says, as a Tanatan, the case of found, I would say it is only a case, all right. And we'll skip. All right. So the rabbi said, why do you have to make an oath? We'll skip this right now. I'm sorry. It was a different passage. You take an oath so that if a person is lying, they really found oaths to be very important in their day and age. And you won't swear falsely under normal circumstances. And if you're forced to swear something, you might change your mind about lying in front of the court. All right, now a minute ago, we looked at the Mishnah about saying the Shema. I brought to you the opening passage of the Talmud Yerushalmi. This is the opening passage from the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. So we have the Mishnah. When you say Shema at nighttime, the time starts coming until pre-century their truma, to end this first watch, the words Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara begins, on what does the Tana base himself? Why does the Mishnah begin with from what time? Furthermore, why does he talk about the evening Shema? Let him talk about the morning Shema. Why don't we start off by talking about the evening Shema? Why not start off, most of us get up in the morning, we start our day, and we finish our day at night. Wouldn't it make more sense to start at the beginning of the day and end at nighttime? And as a matter of fact, the later law codes do follow that pattern. Okay. So the Tana means a person who taught the Mishnah, bases himself on the Torah, where it is written, when you lie down, when you rise up. This is not my translation. And he states thus, when does the time of the recital of the Shema of lying down begin? In other words, why does he start with the nighttime Shema? Because the Shema itself says, when you lie down, when you rise up. Since the Torah starts with nighttime, the Mishnah starts with nighttime. Okay, so now he's explaining why does it start with nighttime. All right. Then it asks, so now, when the priest enters, and if you like, I can answer, he learns the precedence of the evening from the account of creation. Well, I got another answer for you. Not just because it says in the Mishnah, in the Torah, when you lie down, when you rise up, because in the Torah it says there's an evening and there was a morning one day. So we start with the evening. All right. So, okay, let's say that's the case. So then why in the next Mishnah, or a little bit later on, we start, when we're talking about the blessings that are associated with the Shema, it says the morning Shema is preceded by 2 blessings and followed by 1. The evening is preceded by 2 blessings and followed by 2. Let him there too mention the evening Shema first. Why do you change now? Over there, we have a different order. So they're trying to understand how the Mishnah was constructed. And then some of what we read in that other Yerushalmi passage is here. Again, I'll leave it for you to look it up yourselves, to go through it and you see. Okay. Now, I'm going to go down to talk about commentaries first. Over the course of the centuries, the Talmud became difficult to understand. It was written in Aramaic. It's very abrupt. It doesn't spell everything out. How are we to understand it? So one way of dealing with it was what are the commentaries. One of the most famous of the commentaries is that of Rashi. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac, also called, I've never seen it called Hasidi's, Yitzchaki in Hebrew. He was the most important commentator on the Torah and on the Talmud. As you see, according to this, he was born in northern France around the year 1040 and died in Worms in 1105. And it gives you a background here, but Rashi goes through the Talmud line by line, explaining what difficulties he finds there in the Talmud text. He's mostly interested in explaining what is right there. Okay? Words that we may not understand. He sometimes translates them to the common vernacular of his day, which is Old French. So if you want to know the words for very common items in the Middle Ages that are not found in literature, they find them in Rashi's commentary. A halter for a horse or a plow's head, that sort of thing is sometimes found in Rashi. Famously, he had no sons, only daughters, but his grandsons, Rabbeinu Yaakov Tam, the Rashbam, they were, who followed him, were founders of what we call the Tosafot. They come along the next 2 generations, 3, 4 generations, and sometimes disagree with their grandfather. That's always fun to see that. And sometimes they deal with issues that he may not be talking about. Often they will talk about issues of common practice in their day that seems to contradict what you find in the Talmud. And they defend their common practices. And today, those 2 commentaries, Rashi and the Tosafot, are always printed in the common editions of the Talmud. And then you have modern commentaries up till today. Dean Steinsaltz of Blessed Memory, Zichron Livracha, recently passed away, authored a modern Hebrew translation and commentary on the Talmud. We also find others as well. All right. I want to move on. I just have the Hebrew here. if we go down a little bit further, we have the beginnings of law codes. And the problem with the Talmud, the problem with the Mishnah, is while it is organized in a general sense, it's not always organized as well as it could be. For example, if you want to find the laws for the Hanukkah candles, when you light them, where you light them, all of that, you have to know it's found in a chapter in the Talmud, not even in the Mishnah, in the tractate of Shabbat. Because there's no tractate that refers to Hanukkah. Furthermore, the laws may not always be found in the same area. Sometimes you have to look at several different parts of the Talmud to find what the law is. Not everybody knew it. Furthermore, the Talmud doesn't always tell you what the actual law is. They give you the opinions. How do you know who you follow? Do we follow Rabbi Eliezer? Do we follow the sages? Do we follow Rabban Gamliel? So one of the first major attempts was done by a man called Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi. Did I give his dates on the other page? Yeah. He was born around 1013 in Algeria, all right, in the city of Fas. Okay. He basically made a Reader's Digest of the Talmud, trying to compact it to give you the basic law. So I will translate. I didn't have time to write it all out. So he quotes the Talmud passage. Our sages taught, when do we start saying the Shema? At nighttime, from the time the people enter to eat their bread on the eve of the Sabbath. That's according to Rabbi Meir. And the sages say, from the time that the priests enter to eat their truma, and the way to know when this time is when the star comes out. Stars come out at night. Even though there's no proof to this, there's a hint at it. And he cites that when day and night begin with the stars coming out. So he goes on to say, today, whether is according to the Mishnah or according to the Braita, the recitation Shema, according to the rabbis, is from the time the priests enter to eat their truma, which is the time the stars come out at night. And the law is that we decide in accordance with the majority. And so Rabbi Eliezer tells us when we begin, because nobody disagrees with him. But everybody else, majority of the rabbis say until midnight, so therefore we say Shema ideally until midnight, but we can follow the opinion of Rabban Gamliel if we didn't say it in time. So again, it's not really the best way of dealing with understanding it. And the next generation, we come to Moses Maimonides, born in 1204 in Cordova, Spain, in 1138, and he dies in Egypt around 1204. Maimonides, I mentioned many, many times, one of the most important works is his Mishneh Torah, which is a 14-volume law code discussing all of rabbinic tradition, Jewish law. So, and he writes in very nice, pure, easily understood Hebrew. And he intentionally doesn't argue back and forth. He just gives the law. He's not interested in the different opinions. He says, you can read my book and you know what the law is. So here's how he opens this section on the recitation of the Shema. The Shema is read twice every day, in the evening and in the morning, as it is said, when you lie down, when you rise up. The phrases in this text meaning at the time when men are lying down, that is at night, and the time when they have risen, that is by day. What does one read? 3 sections as follows. And he gives you the passages of the Shema. When reciting the Shema after including the first verse, one repeats in a low tone the sentence, "Blessed be the name of his glorious sovereignty forever and ever," and then resumes reading the first paragraph. All right. So this is very simple, clear, organized, very well organized explanation of Jewish law. Later on, he says in a passage about how you say the Shema. One may recite the Shema walking, standing, lying, riding on the back of an animal, or sitting, but not parakdan, that is with one's face into the ground, or cast on one's back with one's face upwards, but one may recite when one is lying on one side. So you want to know how you do it? He says you can do it on a horseback, camelback, just as long as you know what you're doing. Now, Maimonides' work, 14 volumes, gives the law in accordance with Sephardic tradition, based upon the Rif and others. That was not always acceptable to the Ashkenazic authorities. And there are commentaries written on Maimonides' Mishneh Torah that sometimes disagree with him, giving the Ashkenazic interpretation. But much of what Maimonides wrote about was really not applicable. He writes about the laws of the temple, a lot of laws dealing with various kinds of issues of Tuma and Tahara, ritual purity. And so a little bit later, a man by the name of Yaakov ben Asher, who was born in Cologne, which is in Germany, around the year 1269. He dies in Spain in 1343. Now, his father, Rabbeinu Asher, was a great sage. He and his sons fled from Germany under persecution. This is during the time of the Second Crusades, I think it was, third, and end up in Spain. And Rabbeinu Asher was so well versed and so well known that he becomes the head of the Spanish Jewish community. He becomes the most important judge there. His son, Yaakov, writes a work largely built upon what his father had to say and what Maimonides had to say and others. He composes a work that he calls the Arba Turim, the Four Pillars. It's a work in 4 volumes, major volumes, talking about the laws, all the laws that are applicable in their day and age. It's also sometimes referred to as the Tur Shulchan Aruch, because a little bit later, a few hundred years later, Yosef Karo, who was also born in Spain in 1488, that was just before the Spanish expulsion, which is in 1492. So he was 4 years old when his family fled. He dies in Tzfat in 1575. He wrote a massive commentary on the Tur, on Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher's work. And then he wrote an abbreviated version of that, which became known as the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. Once again, though, he was a Sephardic rabbi. Rabbi Moses Easterless writes a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch that then eventually becomes part of it. And today, when we pull out a Shulchan Aruch, we got what Carl says and what Rabbi Moses Easterless says on Jewish law. And that was the last really totally major acceptable. So if we look at the Shulchan Aruch, the time for reciting the Shema in the evening is from the time 3 small stars appear. And if it is a cloudy day, you should wait until no doubt exists in his mind. Remember, in those days, they didn't have many watches around. If we recited before this time, you should repeat it later without blessings. If the congregation recites the Shema when it is yet day, remember I mentioned the Tosafot, asked that, not just the Tosafot, the Talmud. He should recite the Shema with its blessings and pray with them. And when the proper time arrives, he should recite without blessings. Ideally, one must recite the Shema immediately when the stars appear, and his time is until midnight. If he transgressed and delayed and recited before the break of dawn, he has fulfilled his obligation. You can catch in a passage of the Talmud, Maimonides' wording of it, etc. In the 19th century, there was a work called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is an abbreviated list of laws. I have the passage here. You can glance at it. He also abbreviates the basic laws of the daily worship, of daily behavior, the Sabbath and holidays. There was also Rabbi Isaac Klein's work, which we suggest that you have, the Guide for Jewish Law. All of these are examples of law codes that were written as codification. So you start with the Torah. You have midrash, both legal and homiletical, on the Torah. You have the organization of the oral law, first in the form of the Mishnah and other rabbinic works, commented on, expanded upon by the Talmud, which are then mined for codification of Jewish law. Now, there's one other area that before we finish, I want to touch upon, and then I'll let you go. There's another way of dealing with some of these questions that takes place even today. Rabbi, we are under rules of a pandemic. What is better? Should I pray at home, or should I risk going to the synagogue when it was still large numbers going to the synagogue? The rabbi might say, well, you are a healthy individual, and if the synagogue has mass and everybody stays separate from each other, you should go to the synagogue to pray because it's preferable to pray with a minyan. Or, well, you know, you had cancer. You have a weakened immune system. Therefore, it is what is the right thing to do for you is not go to the synagogue. Now, actually, that's what rabbis have done today. Throughout the course of history, questions would come up. Either sometimes a question about what's written in the Talmud, sometimes a question about what is the proper practice today. Is it the same thing the Talmud is talking about? Rabbi, they now have this new invention called the printing press. Can we make a Torah using a printing press? Rabbi, they have electronic lights today. Can I turn the lights on and off on the Sabbath? Rabbi, in our community, certain foods are not eaten on Passover. Do I have to follow that tradition? So, right, not long after the completion of the Talmud, these questions and others, all kinds of questions, were asked of rabbis. And the rabbis would respond. They would answer questions. We call this responsa, from the Latin, responsum, responsa, Hebrew she'elot utshuvot, questions and answers. And beginning back when, people would send a letter to, originally to the Gaonim, the rabbis of the head of the academies in Babylonia, during the early and late early Islamic period. and they would get a letter in response. As a matter of fact, the first prayer book was really that. There was a question in Spain, what's the proper order of the prayer service? And one of the earliest prayer books is really a responsive from a rabbi in Gaon, Rav Amram Gaon. All of the great sages, Maimonides, for example, some of the Baalei Tosafot, others wrote responsa. Sometimes we find in them marvelous bits of history as a result of it. Even today, though, I'll come back to that in a minute, I'll circle back. Rabbis are writing responsa now. Somebody somewhere in the world is probably writing a response. If he's an important rabbi and people pay attention to him, it might be collected and published. And you have a whole library of responsa written by rabbis over the ages. And when a question comes up, one of the things that modern decisors of Jewish law do is they consult the Bible, they consult the Talmud, they consult the law codes, they consult the responsa that were written on the subject matter. And the response have been written on everything. Determination of death, artificial insemination, heart transplants. These are modern ones that have been come about, just like the issues that have come up in recent history about the COVID, what to do. And like I said, if they're an important rabbi, they may be published. If they're not an important rabbi, it may be, read by somebody who wrote the question and then, end of story. Just want to share with you a little bit of a wonderful thing. I learned this many years ago when I was studying in Israel at the Hartman Institute. Maimonides was asked a question from a court. There was this guy whose wife was not listening to him. And she was being a rebellious wife according to the letter that was sent to Maimonides. And Maimonides ruled in favor of the husband. The details are irrelevant. Then there's another response written by Maimonides talking about a similar situation. He answers in favor of the wife. And when you read the two of them together, you discover what happened was it's the same case. There was this no good man. He deserted his wife. He went away for a long time. She was left almost destitute. She had to find some kind of work. She taught in the school that her brother ran, and then later on she was running the school. Her husband comes back. He wants certain things from her. He wants to take a second wife. And they had a codicil in those days in Egypt that if a man wanted to take a second wife, even if he wanted to hire a female maid, he had to have his wife's permission. And if she didn't give it to him, he had to pay her a large sum of money. Okay. So to cut it short, he was a real SOB. Maimonides was carefully answered the question and says, yeah, she's a rebellious wife. He has the right to divorce her, which is what she wanted. He didn't want to divorce her. He wanted her whatever thing. And she didn't want anything to do with him. So he says, yeah, she's a rebellious wife. If he wants to divorce her, he can divorce her. And if he doesn't want to pay her the ketubah, he doesn't have to pay her the ketubah because she's a rebellious wife. And she was fine with that. So fascinatingly, we get this little bit of a introduction to life that was going on as a result of this responsa. And many responsa give us information about how life was led at different times. Just like if you read a responsa today, you will find that they will touch upon subject. And, and some of them become very difficult in how you answer them. And so one of the greatest sources of understanding history is the responsa literature. Okay, let's see, I want to stop sharing. And we will have to leave it at that. Any questions anybody has? I hope I try. I know it's a lot in the last 2 weeks to throw at you. What you need to really understand, the basic construct. You have the oral Torah, you have the written Torah, you have the Tanakh, the Bible, you have commentaries, you have law codes, you have the two Talmud, the Mishnah and the two Talmuds, and responsive literature that's written. And that gives you an idea of how Jewish law, even in the Reform world. I have a collection that was written by a very important Reform rabbi, scholar, who wrote about questions in Reform Judaism, even though they often did not care about the law, although the earliest Reform rabbis really did. And so any kind of issue that comes in up today in the Jewish community, in the religious world, even in the Reform, usually they write some kind of response or some kind of understanding of the issue at hand. And that's how Jewish laws decide, traditionally anyway, decide up till today. With the Talmud, the law codes, and all of those things.